From the forests of Oregon to the dark waters of Lake Superior, 10 people vanished without a trace. No bodies, no answers, just chilling mysteries that defy time. These are the disappearances America can't forget. Crater Lake, Oregon, is one of the most beautiful yet unsettling places in America. Its deep blue water, perfectly round basin, and sheer cliffs have long drawn travelers, photographers, and nature lovers. But the same qualities that make the lake breathtaking also give it a strange, almost otherworldly presence. For the Klamath tribe, who lived in the region long before settlers arrived, Crater Lake was sacred, a place where spirits dwelled, and where humans were never meant to linger. In the summer of 2006, that aura of mystery turned into something darker, when a man disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that still haunts park rangers and investigators today. His name was Daniel Foster, 35 years old, an amateur photographer from Portland who had recently purchased new equipment. He was described as quiet, independent, and fascinated with landscapes. Friends said that he could spend hours in one place waiting for the perfect light. On a Friday, in early August, Daniel told his roommate that he was heading south for the weekend to capture Crater Lake at sunrise. He loaded his camera gear into his sedan and drove off. That was the last time anyone saw him. When Daniel failed to show up for work on Monday, his colleagues grew concerned. He was reliable, never late, and had mentioned his trip casually to several people by Tuesday when his car was located in a parking lot inside Crater Lake National Park. The concern turned into alarm. The vehicle was locked, his wallet and phone inside, and his camera bag still sitting on the back seat. The battery of the camera was dead, and the last photo appeared to be a test shot from Portland before he even left the city. There were no signs of forced entry or foul play. The car looked as if its owner had stepped out for a short walk and simply never returned. Search and rescue teams combed the park for days. Helicopters scanned the cliffs and the rim of the caldera. Divers were called in to explore sections of the lake, though the depth of Crater Lake makes diving hazardous and nearly impossible beyond certain points. Ground teams swept the trails and campgrounds. Nothing was found, no footprints, no scraps of clothing, no camera, no body. It was as if Daniel had evaporated into thin air. For those familiar with Crater Lake's history, his disappearance felt eerily familiar. Over the years, the park has been linked to several unexplained vanishings. Locals whisper about the lake's strange ability to keep secrets. With depths reaching almost 2,000 feet, it is the deepest lake in the United States, and its waters are so clear that visibility can extend over 100 feet down. Yet ironically, this clarity hides more than it reveals. The cold temperature and lack of inflowing streams preserve the lake in a way that makes it nearly impossible for bodies to resurface. Park rangers openly acknowledge that if someone falls in, the lake may never give them back. But investigators had a problem. There was no evidence that Daniel ever went near the water. The trail cameras in the area showed no record of him. Visitors interviewed in the following weeks could not recall seeing a man matching his description. The official record simply lists him as missing, with the possibility that he either wandered off the rim and fell into the lake, or hiked into the surrounding forest and succumbed to the elements. Yet the details didn't add up. Why would a dedicated photographer leave his gear behind in the car? Why would his phone and wallet be neatly tucked away, as if he planned only a brief stop? If he intended to take pictures, he would have carried the camera. That single fact continues to puzzle both his family and investigators. As weeks turned into months, Theories multiplied. Some suggested that Daniel deliberately walked away from his life. But there was no evidence of financial trouble, no note, no sign of depression. His family insisted he was happy, making plans for upcoming exhibitions of his work. Others believed he may have encountered foul play, but with no evidence of a struggle around the car and no reports of suspicious activity. In the park that weekend, the theory lacked weight. Then there were those who looked to Crater Lake's more mystical reputation. Stories of people drawn to the rim, staring into the blue void until they lose balance or even leap voluntarily, have circulated for decades. Some rangers admit to feeling a strange pull when standing close to the edge. Did Daniel succumb to something beyond explanation? Years later, the case remains unsolved. The car has long been removed from the lot. Daniel's name sits on a list of missing persons from Oregon, alongside others whose lives seemed to vanish in the blink of an eye. For his family, the pain is ongoing. Without a body, there is no closure, no funeral, no answers. His mother once said in an interview, "It's like he was taken by the lake itself, like it wanted him." Those words capture the eerie silence that still surrounds Crater Lake every evening. When the sun dips below the rim and shadows stretch across the water, visitors often describe a heaviness in the air, a sense of being watched, as if the lake remembers those it has swallowed. For law enforcement, the file is open but inactive. They cannot close it without a body, but they cannot pursue leads that do not exist. Park rangers continue their duties, watching thousands of tourists come and go each year, while quietly acknowledging that some people never leave. Crater Lake's beauty masks a darkness that defies explanation, a place where a man like Daniel Foster could vanish in broad daylight without leaving behind a single clue. It is a reminder that even in a modern age of satellites, GPS, and constant surveillance, there are still places in America where mystery thrives, and where the earth itself seems determined to hold its secrets. Downtown Los Angeles has always carried a dual identity: the bright promise of California dreams and the darker, grittier undercurrent of desperation. Few places symbolize that tension more than the Cecil Hotel. Built in the 1920s, it was once a glamorous destination for business travelers, boasting a marble lobby and ornate architecture. But as the decades passed, the area declined and the Cecil became infamous. By the 1980s and 90s, it was nicknamed the Suicide Hotel, home to transient tenants, drug users, and a disturbing number of deaths. Against this backdrop, in January 2013, a 21-year-old Canadian student named Eliza Lam checked in. What followed was one of the most disturbing and unsolved disappearances of the modern era. Elisa was traveling alone along the West Coast, chronicling her trip on social media. She was bright, articulate, and open about her struggles with bipolar disorder, often writing candidly about her mental health. In Los Angeles, she booked a few nights at the Cecil, an affordable stop on her way to Santa Cruz and San Francisco. On January 26th, she arrived at the hotel. Staff would later describe her as polite, even cheerful. She called her parents back home daily to check in. But on January 31st, Eliza missed her scheduled call. Her parents grew worried immediately and reported her missing. The Los Angeles Police Department began investigating. Officers searched her room, finding her belongings still there. Clothes neatly packed, medications, laptop, everything intact. There was no evidence of forced entry, no signs of struggle. Police questioned staff and other guests. Some recalled Eliza spending time in the hotel's common areas, speaking with others, but nothing seemed unusual. Then, weeks passed with no progress. Flyers with her picture went up across the city. Her family flew to Los Angeles. The case might have drifted quietly into the long list of missing persons if not for a decision by LAPD to release a single piece of evidence that would shock the public. It was surveillance footage from one of the Cecil's elevators, dated the night of January 31st. The video, a few minutes long, quickly went viral. In it, Eliza appears disoriented. She steps into the elevator and presses multiple buttons. The doors remain open. She hides in the corner, peeks out, steps back in. At one point, she seems to gesture with her hands, as if speaking to someone. Invisible in the hallway. Her movements are jerky, almost theatrical, alternating between fear, curiosity, and something harder to define. Then she steps out, disappears from view, and the doors close. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. The internet exploded with theories. Some viewers believed Eliza was hiding from someone pursuing her. Others thought she was playing a strange game or under the influence of drugs. The possibility of a psychotic episode was raised, considering her bipolar disorder. But others saw something supernatural, that she was interacting with an unseen presence, haunted by the history of the Cecil itself. To those who had long followed the hotel's reputation, the videos seemed to confirm its cursed aura. Meanwhile, hotel guests began complaining about water pressure. Some noted a strange taste in the tap water, a discoloration that left them uneasy. On February 19th, maintenance workers climbed to the hotel's roof to inspect the water tanks. What they found ended the search. Inside one of the large metal tanks was the decomposing body of Elisa Lam. She had been missing for nearly 3 weeks. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. The tanks were sealed and heavy, requiring ladders and considerable effort to access. How did she get inside? The rooftop itself was off-limits, secured by locked doors and alarm systems. Yet somehow Elisa reached it. The autopsy report concluded accidental drowning, with no evidence of physical trauma or sexual assault. Toxicology tests revealed her prescribed medications, though some levels suggested she might not have been taking them consistently. No illegal drugs were found. The coroner ruled her death accidental, the product of mental illness and misadventure. But for many, that explanation felt hollow to her family. The official story was unsatisfying. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the hotel, claiming negligence in securing the rooftop and water tanks. A judge later dismissed the case, citing that the hotel could not have reasonably foreseen such an incident. Online, debates raged. Some pointed to her unusual behavior in the elevator video as clear evidence of a mental health crisis. Others clung to darker possibilities, that Eliza had been pursued, that someone else had placed her in the tank, that police had overlooked vital evidence. Conspiracy theories spread wildly. The case became one of the most dissected internet mysteries of the decade. The Cecil's history only fueled the speculation. The hotel had housed serial killers like Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, and Jack Unterweger. Suicides and overdoses were common within its walls. With such a reputation, Elisa's death seemed almost preordained, another chapter in a long tradition of horror. Yet those closest to her resisted turning her into a ghost story. She was a daughter, a student, a young woman with ambitions and struggles. To her family, the tragedy was not a supernatural mystery, but a devastating loss. Still, the unease remains. Visitors who stay at the Cecil now rebranded as the Stay on Main, often ask about her, about the water tanks, about the elevator video that refuses to fade from memory. The footage continues to circulate online, haunting viewers who try to decode its every movement. Her story has been the subject of documentaries, podcasts, and countless speculative articles. In each retelling, one detail stands out. The moment Eliza steps out of the elevator and disappears into the unseen hallway, as if walking into a place only she could perceive. Nearly a decade later, the questions linger. Did Eliza suffer a sudden break from reality and find her way, inexplicably, to the roof? Did someone help her, unseen by cameras, and evade detection? Or was her death one more unexplained event in a building that seems to collect them? Criminologists point out that the simplest explanation is often true. Mental illness, poor security, a tragic accident. But the human mind resists simplicity when confronted with images as unsettling as those elevator frames. Something about Elisa's final moments feels staged by forces outside the ordinary, as though the Cecil itself claimed her. The case of Elisa Lam sits at the intersection of fact and myth, tragedy and legend. It is a reminder that beneath the bright lights of Los Angeles, darkness endures. A young woman came to the city searching for adventure, and instead became part of one of its most enduring mysteries. The Cecil Hotel stands today, its windows overlooking a city that has never fully explained what happened inside its walls. For those who watch the elevator video late at night, the unease is inescapable. You can't help but feel that Eliza Lam wasn't alone, that someone or something was with her in that hallway, and that the truth remains hidden, just out of sight. Yosemite National Park is one of the crown jewels of the American wilderness, a place of towering granite cliffs, waterfalls plunging hundreds of feet, and forests that seem to stretch forever. Each year, millions of visitors arrive to hike its trails and camp beneath the stars. But Yosemite also has a darker reputation, one less celebrated in glossy travel brochures. It is a place where people vanish. The disappearances are not numerous compared to the crowds that visit, but they are striking in their detail. Campers stepping away from tents and never returning. Hikers leaving behind perfectly arranged campsites. Families finding themselves split apart in an instant. In the summer of 1989, Yosemite witnessed one of its most chilling mysteries, the disappearance of two young boys, whose case remains unresolved to this day. It was early July, peak season. The Reynolds family from Sacramento had planned a week-long camping trip, eager to escape the city heat. Parents Mark and Linda Reynolds brought their two sons, 11-year-old Matthew and 9-year-old Jacob. Both boys were adventurous and outdoorsy, thrilled by the idea of fishing, hiking, and roasting marshmallows by the fire. They set up camp near Tenaya Lake, a popular but still relatively wild spot surrounded by pine forest and granite domes. On their first 2 days, nothing seemed unusual. The family hiked short trails, met other campers, and took photos of the boys skipping rocks across the lake. On the third morning, July 12th, the parents awoke to something that would forever alter their lives. The boys' tent was unzipped, its flap open, and both sleeping bags empty. At first, Mark assumed they had woken early to explore nearby, perhaps looking for squirrels or trying to start a fire. But minutes stretched into hours, and the forest remained silent. Panic set in. The family alerted rangers, who immediately initiated a search. By afternoon, dozens of volunteers, rangers, and even military personnel were combing the surrounding area. Searchers expected to find the boys within hours, Children that age rarely venture far. They usually leave footprints, clothing, or signs of their passage. But in this case, the forest gave nothing back. Bloodhounds failed to pick up a scent beyond the campsite. No small shoes disturbed the dust of the trail. No broken branches marked a path through the woods. It was as if the boys had stepped into the night and vanished. Investigators interviewed other campers in the area. A group nearby recalled hearing laughter late the night before, children's voices, but nothing alarming. No one reported seeing strangers or suspicious activity. The parents insisted their sons were too timid to wander into the forest in darkness. Besides, they were not carrying flashlights, water, or jackets. Temperatures in the high Sierra drop sharply after dark. Even if they had wandered away, they would not have survived long without shelter. But the relentless search, involving helicopters sweeping with infrared and divers probing the lake, produced nothing. Days stretched into weeks. Media outlets picked up the story, drawing comparisons to other disappearances in national parks. Families across the country saw the photographs of Matthew and Jacob too smiling. Freckled boys in baseball caps and recoiled at the thought that children could vanish so completely in a public park. Tips poured in. Some claimed to have seen the boys on nearby highways. Others reported possible abductions. Every lead was checked, and every lead collapsed into nothing. Behind the scenes, rangers debated quietly about what had happened. One possibility was that the boys were taken by an animal. Mountain lions are present in Yosemite, and though attacks are rare, they can occur. Yet no blood, no torn clothing, no signs of a struggle were found. Another theory was drowning. Lake is deep and cold, and children have drowned there before, but divers scoured the water repeatedly without success. If the boys had drowned, their bodies would likely have surfaced within days. Instead, the lake remained still, offering no answers. Whispers of a human abduction circulated as well. Could someone have entered the campsite and lured or forced the children away while the parents slept? The notion chilled everyone involved. Yet again, evidence was absent. There were no tire tracks, no reports of vehicles leaving the park in the night, no accounts of strangers hanging around campsites. In the sterile language of official reports, the case simply stalled. Cause of disappearance undetermined. The Reynolds family refused to give up hope. For years, they pursued leads, hiring private investigators, circulating updated age progression photos of their sons, appearing on television in the hope that someone, somewhere, would recognize them. Each tip raised their hopes and dashed them. Again, by the late 1990s, hope had thinned into grief, though the parents never held a funeral. Without bodies, closure was impossible to this day. Hikers and rangers who pass through the area sometimes stop and look around, aware of the story. Yosemite holds its mysteries tightly, and the disappearance of Matthew and Jacob Reynolds has become one of its darkest. Some visitors claim to feel an uncanny stillness at Tenaya Lake, a silence heavier than the wind through the pines. Others recount odd sightings, childlike laughter echoing through the trees, fleeting shapes between the rocks at dusk. Whether those are real or products of suggestion, they add to the legend that has grown around the case. The official record has not changed. The boys are missing, presumed dead, but never found. Their disappearance remains unsolved. For investigators, the absence of evidence is perhaps the most unsettling detail. Children leave traces. They wander, they stumble, they leave behind belongings. Yet here, nothing. The forest floor bore no sign they had ever walked upon it. The lake concealed no remains. It was as though the wilderness itself had reached out and taken them, erasing every clue in the years since. Yosemite has continued to draw millions of visitors, most of whom return safely with photos and memories. But for those who know the story of the Reynolds boys, the park carries an added weight. It is a reminder that the wilderness, however beautiful, is not entirely under human control. Sometimes it takes, and sometimes it never gives back. And for two boys who vanished in the summer of 1989, that truth became eternal. Their laughter was swallowed by the trees, their faces frozen in photographs, and their absence still haunts one of America's most iconic landscapes. Montana's highways are long, quiet stretches of road cutting through vast open landscapes of prairie and mountain. For drivers unaccustomed to the emptiness, it can feel like traveling through another world. No lights, no houses, no sign of civilization for miles. Highway 16, sometimes called the loneliest road in Montana, has seen its share of accidents and wildlife encounters. But in November of 1999, it became the site of one of the most unsettling disappearances in the state's history, when a woman vanished from her car under circumstances that still defy explanation. Her name was Karen Mitchell, a 32-year-old nurse from Billings. She was described as responsible, devoted to her work, and close to her family. Karen had spent the weekend visiting friends in Miles City and was returning home late Sunday evening. She called her sister around 8:15 p.m., telling her she was just starting the drive. It was a cold night, with light snow drifting across the road, but visibility was clear. Karen never arrived. By Monday morning, when she failed to show up at the hospital for her shift, her family knew something was wrong. She was not the kind of person to disappear without a word. That afternoon, a state trooper patrolling Highway 16 came across her. Car pulled onto the shoulder about 45 miles outside Miles City. The discovery raised immediate alarm. The sedan's engine was still running, headlights shining into the darkness. The driver's side door stood ajar, and the hazard lights blinked in the cold. Inside, her purse, cell phone, and wallet were untouched. The driver's seat was adjusted properly, and there were no signs of a struggle. Snow on the ground showed no clear footprints, no indication of which direction she might have gone. It was as if she had simply stepped out into the night and dissolved into the frozen. Police and volunteers scoured the area, fearing she had become disoriented and wandered into the fields. Helicopters with infrared searched for heat signatures. Bloodhounds were brought in to trace her scent, but they could not pick up a trail beyond a few yards from the car. With temperatures dropping below freezing, survival would have been difficult if she had remained exposed. Yet no body was found. Ranchers within a 20-mile radius were contacted, barns and sheds inspected, ditches and culverts searched. The land yielded nothing. Investigators began to consider darker possibilities. Had Karen been abducted? If so, why leave her car running, purse and valuables untouched? There were no tire tracks, suggesting another vehicle had pulled up behind her. No fingerprints beyond her own. It was as if she had stepped out to meet someone she knew, or to investigate something on the road, and then simply vanished. Family and friends insisted she had no reason to leave her life behind. She was planning to spend Thanksgiving with them, had recently renewed her lease, and had no financial or personal troubles. Her disappearance was profoundly out of character. Weeks turned into months, and the case grew colder. The only concrete details were the eerie scene at the roadside. A car left idling, lights cutting through the night, the door swinging open in the wind. Highway 16 itself became a character in the mystery. Locals whispered about its desolation, how easy it would be for something or someone to move unseen. Truckers traveling that stretch admitted they often felt uneasy, their headlights swallowed by endless black. A few recalled seeing Karen's car that night, but assumed it was a breakdown. None reported seeing her. Theories multiplied. Some suggested she pulled over because of a mechanical issue and was struck by a passing vehicle, her body hidden in the snow. But her car was in perfect working order, and there were no signs of impact. Others speculated about a spontaneous decision to leave her life behind, but her bank accounts and credit cards were never touched. More sinister suggestions included human trafficking or a predator familiar with the area who knew how to erase traces, yet investigators never identified a suspect, never linked her case to any known offender. Among locals, the story took on an almost supernatural tone. Drivers began to speak of Highway 16 as cursed, a place where people could be swallowed whole. Tales spread of phantom hitchhikers, strange lights on the horizon, figures that appeared in rearview mirrors and vanished when looked at directly. Rational minds dismissed these accounts as folklore born from tragedy, but they carried a haunting resonance. Karen's family, however, held on to a quieter pain, not myth, but absence. The enduring torment of not knowing. By the second anniversary of her disappearance, billboards along the highway displayed her face. Her mother appeared on television, pleading for information, her voice breaking as she asked anyone with knowledge to come forward. Nothing surfaced. Hunters, hikers, and ranchers who spent years in the area never stumbled across remains, clothing, or personal effects. Even as technology advanced, no new leads emerged. It was as though the night had closed over her, erasing every sign. Today, more than 2 decades later, the case is still unsolved. Karen's name remains on Montana's missing persons registry. Her file, a mix of official reports, photographs, and dead-end leads. Investigators occasionally revisit it, hoping new forensic techniques might reveal something overlooked. But without evidence, without a body, the mystery remains locked in place. For her family, the pain is frozen in time, a wound that never heals. Every year that passes deepens the sense of unreality, that someone so alive, so present, could simply step out of her car on a lonely highway and never return. Highway 16 itself remains unchanged. The road still cuts across empty land, its silence broken only by the rumble of trucks and the occasional howl of wind across the plains. Drivers who know the story sometimes slow as they pass the mile marker where Karen's car was found. They glance at the shoulder, half expecting to see headlights still burning in the dark, a car waiting for its driver to return. But the night offers no answers. The road stretches on, indifferent, carrying with it a mystery that endures like the cold Montana wind. A woman, a car, and a vanishing that defies explanation. In the summer of 1982, the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park was buzzing with tourists. Families came for the mountain air, couples came for the romance, and thrill seekers came for the stories. Ghostly children running through the halls, doors opening. On their own, pianos playing without a player. The hotel had already cemented its place in American folklore, not least because Stephen King had stayed there 6 years earlier and walked away with the seed of The Shining. Guests leaned into the creepiness, some requesting the haunted rooms, others hoping for nothing more than a good scare. But one woman checked in, expecting only a quiet mountain getaway. She never checked out. Her name was Mary Donovan, a 26-year-old graduate student from Denver. She was bright, independent, and a little restless, known to friends for her love of hiking and photography. Mary had recently broken off a long-term relationship and, according to her sister, wanted a weekend to clear her head before diving back into her research. The Stanley, with its crisp air and wide views of the Rockies, seemed perfect. She checked into room 217, one of the hotel's most requested rooms, popular with guests drawn to its haunted reputation. The choice seemed playful. She even called her sister that evening, laughing about how the front desk clerk told her the room was spirited. On the morning of July 5th, Mary was seen having breakfast alone in the hotel's dining room. She chatted with a waiter, mentioned she was planning to take her camera on a short hike that day, and then returned upstairs. Around 10:30 a.m., housekeeping knocked on her door, but got no answer. By afternoon, when the room still hadn't been serviced, staff entered and found her belongings intact, her purse, wallet, and even her hiking boots. But Mary herself was gone. At first, no one thought much of it. Guests often left for day trips into Rocky Mountain National Park, but when she didn't return by evening, staff grew concerned. Her car was still parked in the lot. Her camera sat on the desk by the window. There was no sign she had taken any supplies, no indication she had prepared for even a short walk. By the next morning, with still no sign of her, hotel management contacted the Estes Park police. The search began with the surrounding grounds. Volunteers, rangers, and officers combed the nearby trails, fearing she might have gone exploring without proper gear. But the weather had been clear and mild, and there were no reports of hikers in distress. Bloodhounds were brought in and given Mary's scent from her clothing. The dogs tracked her through the hallways of the Stanley, down a set of stairs, and out a side door into the courtyard. And then, without explanation, the trail ended. It was as if she had walked out into the open air and simply vanished. Detectives considered foul play. They questioned staff and guests, interviewed everyone who had spoken to Mary that weekend. No one reported hearing a struggle. No one saw her leave with another person. Security at the hotel was minimal at the time, but there was no indication of forced entry into her room. The door had been locked from the inside when staff first entered. That detail puzzled investigators. If Mary had left willingly, she would have had to lock the door behind her. But her room key was found on the nightstand. Her family arrived in Estes Park within days, plastering her photograph around town, appealing to local media. They insisted Mary had no reason to run away, no secret troubles she was escaping. The theory of voluntary disappearance didn't hold. She had left behind not only her wallet, but also a half-finished letter to a friend on the desk. It was mundane, cheerful, full of plans for the upcoming semester. It was not a goodbye. Theories swirled in the weeks that followed. Some suspected she had been lured out of the hotel by someone she met that morning. Perhaps another guest, though no one fitting that description was ever identified. Others whispered about the darker reputation of the Stanley itself. Guests in room 217, after her disappearance, reported hearing footsteps at night, water running in the bathroom, faint laughter echoing through the walls. Housekeepers spoke of objects moving on their own, lights flickering without cause. To them, Mary's vanishing fit into a larger pattern of inexplicable events. But to police, the suggestion of ghosts was a distraction from an earthly crime they could not prove. The official investigation stretched on for months but produced no answers. Posters with Mary's face lingered in shop windows in Estes Park. Long after the search had ended, Her family returned to Denver with no body, no explanation, only grief and gnawing uncertainty. Without evidence of abduction, foul play, or even a confirmed timeline of when she left her room, the case stagnated. The file remains open to this day. What makes the disappearance so chilling is its combination of the ordinary and the impossible. Guests vanish from wilderness trails, from city streets, from highways, but from a locked hotel room in the middle of the day, with her possessions undisturbed and no trace left behind. It defies the usual patterns. That strangeness has kept the case alive in local memory, fueling speculation long after the official search stopped. The Stanley Hotel, for its part, embraced its haunted reputation in the decades that followed. Ghost tours lead visitors through the halls, and room 217 remains one of the most requested stays, immortalized by its connection to King's novel. Guides sometimes mention Mary's story in hushed tones, a reminder that the hotel's mysteries are not only fictional. Some say she still lingers there, her presence felt in sudden cold drafts, in cameras that malfunction without reason, in the sense that someone is standing just behind you. For others, her absence is more unsettling than any ghost. The idea that a living, breathing woman could vanish in a place full of people, her story swallowed by silence. 40 years later, the questions remain. Did Mary Donovan walk out of the hotel and encounter a stranger who meant her harm? Did she wander into the mountains and meet a fate the searchers never uncovered? Or did something less explainable occur in those old corridors, something tied to the Stanleys' long reputation for the uncanny? The records are silent. The police file offers no resolution, and room 217 waits for its next guest. Its mysteries deepened by the one story that remains unsolved. The weekend in 1982, when a young woman disappeared, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a ghost story that might not be just a story at all. The great Smoky Mountains have always carried a dual reputation. On one hand, they are a natural wonder, a rolling expanse of ridges and valleys stretching between North Carolina and Tennessee, visited by millions of hikers and families each year. On the other, they hold a history of disappearances that locals whisper about in hushed tones, cases that seem to swallow people whole without leaving so much as a footprint behind. One such case unfolded in the summer of 1976, when a boy named David Lang vanished during a family camping trip. His disappearance remains one of the park's darkest mysteries, a wound that never healed. The Lang family was not unfamiliar with the outdoors. They lived in Asheville, North Carolina, and often spent weekends hiking and camping in the Smokies. That June, David's father, Robert, decided to take the family to Cades Cove, a popular campground surrounded by scenic meadows and heavily wooded trails. It was the kind of trip meant to cement family memories, long hikes, roasted marshmallows, stories by the fire. David, the eldest of 3 children, had just finished his freshman year of high school. He was tall for his age, lanky and restless, with a love for adventure that sometimes worried his mother. The first day passed without incident. The family set up their tent, cooked dinner, and watched fireflies blink in the warm air. On the second day, June 16th, they hiked a short loop trail that wound through thick forest and opened up onto a ridge with sweeping views of the valley. It was there, in broad daylight, that something went terribly wrong. According to his younger sister, David had been walking a few paces ahead, swinging a stick he had picked up from the trail. Their parents were behind, urging the younger children to keep up. At one point, David disappeared around a bend. When the rest of the family followed only seconds later, the trail was empty. He was gone. At first, no one panicked. They called his name, expecting him to jump out from behind a tree, playing a prank. When there was no answer, they assumed he had walked farther up the trail. But as the minutes stretched on, fear replaced annoyance. The forest was quiet, the kind of heavy silence that presses in on you. Robert hurried up the trail, shouting his son's name. His wife stayed behind with the younger children, her voice growing more frantic with each unanswered call. By the time the family made it back to camp and reported David missing, the sun was beginning to set. Rangers launched a search within the hour, assembling volunteers, dogs, and flashlights. They scoured the loop trail and the surrounding woods, moving outward in widening circles. The dogs picked up a faint trail for a short distance, but it ended abruptly in a patch of dense undergrowth. Searchers expected to find a shoe, a scrap of clothing, some sign of a struggle. They found nothing. Over the next week, the search expanded to include helicopters, horseback patrols, and hundreds of volunteers. Rangers checked streams, caves, even old logging roads. They interviewed other campers, hoping someone had seen David leave the trail. No one had. The boy had simply vanished in the space of seconds, between the time he rounded a bend and the moment his family followed. That impossible timeline baffled investigators then, and it baffles them still. Rumors spread quickly. Some suggested David had been abducted, perhaps by someone hiding in the woods. But there were no footprints, no tire tracks, no strangers reported in the area. Others whispered about wild animals, though there were no signs of an attack, no blood or torn clothing. And then there were the darker theories, whispered around campfires long after the search ended, that the Smokies held places where people could slip away, swallowed by the land itself. Places where the earth seemed to take its own. The official investigation slowed after 2 weeks, when all leads had dried up. David's family returned home in grief, carrying with them the unbearable weight of uncertainty. His mother never accepted the idea that he was simply gone. She left his room untouched, his belongings exactly as he had left them, as if he might walk back through the door at any moment. His father grew distant, consumed by guilt for not keeping closer watch on the trail that day. Years later, hikers on that same ridge reported strange experiences, voices in the trees, fleeting shadows, the sense of being watched. One couple claimed they heard a boy's voice calling faintly in the distance, though no one else was on the trail. Rangers chalked it up to the mountain wind carrying sound in unusual ways, but those who know the story of David Lang can't help but think otherwise. The file remains open, though no new evidence has surfaced in nearly 5 decades. His family eventually moved away from Asheville, unable to bear the constant reminders of what they had lost. But in the Smokies, the story endures. Old rangers still remember the search, how thorough it was, how impossible it seemed that a boy could disappear without leaving a trace. Campers trade the story at night, half cautionary tale, half ghost story. Parents keep their children close when hiking the ridges, glancing over their shoulders at every bend in the trail. The great Smoky Mountains remain as beautiful and as dangerous as ever, a place where nature can both awe and consume. Most visitors leave with nothing but photographs and memories, but a few vanish into the silence, leaving behind questions that no amount of searching can answer. For David Lang's family, the trail through Cades Cove is frozen in time. Forever the place where their son slipped out of sight and into mystery. Nearly 50 years later, the air in those woods still feels heavy, as though it remembers, and those who hike there today sometimes pause at the bend in the trail, staring into the trees, wondering how it is possible for a boy to disappear in plain sight. No answer comes, only the silence of the mountains, vast and unmoved, holding its secrets close. Lake Superior is vast in a way that defies comprehension. Standing on its rocky shoreline, it feels more like an ocean than a lake its waves crash. Its horizon stretches endlessly, and its moods shift from tranquil to violent in a matter of minutes. Sailors call it the graveyard of the Great Lakes, a body of water that has claimed thousands of ships and untold lives. But in the summer of 1977, it wasn't a freighter or a fishing boat that disappeared. It was a young couple, camping near the lake's edge, who vanished without a trace, leaving behind one of the strangest missing persons cases ever recorded in the region. The couple Michael Turner, 24, and his girlfriend, Lisa Whitaker, 23, were from Duluth, Minnesota. They were adventurous but not reckless, known for weekend trips along the North Shore. That July, they decided to camp near Split Rock Lighthouse, a popular spot with breathtaking cliffs and a long history of shipwrecks. Friends later said, Michael had been fascinated by the stories of storms and wrecks, how so many lives had been swallowed by Superior's cold waters. Lisa, quieter and more cautious, went along reluctantly but admitted she was drawn to the romance of the place they left on July 9th, planning to stay 2 nights. Witnesses saw them setting up camp in a clearing above the cliffs, their small blue tent visible from the trail. That evening, other campers heard music drifting from their old radio, playing softly against the backdrop of crashing waves. At dusk, the two were seen walking hand in hand toward the overlook, pausing to watch the last light fade across the water. The next morning, hikers passed the site again. The tent was still there, their car parked nearby, but no one saw Michael or Lisa. By that afternoon, a park ranger grew concerned. The couple had left their gear behind backpacks, sleeping bags, even Lisa's purse. Only the radio had been moved, its batteries drained, sitting near the edge of the cliff as though it had been carried there deliberately. When neither returned by evening, a search began. Rangers checked the trails, fearing the couple had fallen from the cliffs. Boats patrolled the waters below, scanning the rocks and coves. Helicopters flew low, circling for signs of bodies or bright clothing. But the search revealed nothing. No broken branches, no blood, no scraps of clothing, and most disturbingly, no bodies floating in the water, which was the grim expectation if the couple had indeed fallen. The investigation quickly deepened. Friends and family were interviewed. There were no signs of conflict, no history of running away. Michael worked as a mechanic, Lisa as a nursing assistant. They had no enemies, no debts, no reason to vanish voluntarily. And yet, every piece of evidence suggested they had stepped away from their camp and never come back. Locals began to speculate. Some believed the couple had been pulled into the lake by an accidental loose rock, a slip near the edge but seasoned. Searchers were unconvinced. The currents of Superior are strong, yes, but bodies almost always surface eventually. To this day, neither Michael nor Lisa has been found. Other theories grew stranger. Old fishermen spoke of the cold spots, places in the lake where currents twist violently, dragging anything caught into underwater caves. Some whispered about ghost ships, that perhaps the couple had been lured by something not of this world. The lighthouse keepers, used to such stories, stayed silent, though one later admitted privately that on the night they vanished, he thought he saw a flicker of light far out on the water, too far for a boat, too steady for lightning. In the months that followed, there were scattered reports. A camper claimed to hear voices at night near the cliffs, a man and woman laughing faintly before being drowned out by the waves. A hiker said he found a footprint too large to be Lisa's, too small to be Michael's, pressed deep into the sand near their abandoned site. These claims were never substantiated, but they fueled the mystery, giving the case an almost folkloric quality. Michael's parents visited the site every summer for years afterward, leaving flowers at the overlook. Lisa's mother refused to believe her daughter was dead. She kept Lisa's room untouched, the radio from the tent sitting on her dresser as though waiting for her to return. Both families pushed for more searches, more dives into the lake, but nothing was ever recovered. Decades later, the site near Split Rock still draws people who know the story. Campers report strange feelings of unease near the clearing where the blue tent once stood. Some say radios and phones die suddenly there, drained as if by an unseen hand, on windy nights, with the waves crashing hard against the rocks. A few claim they can hear faint music and old song drifting across the water. Impossible to trace. For investigators, the case remains cold. There were no signs of foul play, yet the absence of bodies makes an accidental fall unlikely. The couple didn't run away, didn't stage their disappearance, didn't leave behind a note or plan. All they left was silence and an abandoned camp above one of the most unforgiving lakes in the world. Lake Superior is timeless in its indifference. It doesn't reveal its secrets. Ships vanish, bodies sink, and storms rise without warning. Michael, Turner, and Lisa Whitaker are just two more names added to its long history of losses. But their case unsettles because it feels incomplete, unfinished, unresolved. It is not just that they disappeared. It is how suddenly, how completely, how utterly without a trace. Even now, nearly half a century later, visitors who stand at that cliff edge feel the weight of it. The lake stretches out, endless and dark, and the wind carries with it an uneasy reminder. Once something or someone goes into Lake Superior, it may never come back. The water keeps what it wants, and sometimes, it seems, it wants people. Hoover Dam is a monument to human ambition, a colossal wall of concrete holding back the Colorado River, a marvel that transformed the desert into a landscape of power and progress. By day, it hums with life. Tourists snap photographs, guides recite facts, and the vast turbines churn unseen below, generating electricity for millions. But at night, when the crowds vanish and the desert air grows cool, the dam takes on a different character. Its shadows stretch long, the hum deepens into a subterranean growl, and the silence around it feels heavy. It was in that silence, in the summer of 1984, that a man disappeared without a trace, vanishing in one of the most heavily secured and monitored structures in the United States. His name was Daniel Rourke, 32 years old, a construction safety inspector contracted by the Bureau of Reclamation. He wasn't new to the site. He'd been inspecting the dam's maintenance tunnels and access points for 2 years. Friends described him as methodical, cautious, someone who never cut corners. He was married with a 6-year-old daughter and was known for joking that Hoover Dam was the safest place in Never Desolate to break, too guarded to be dangerous. On the evening of August 14th, Daniel stayed late. Maintenance crews had been reporting strange vibrations in one of the inspection tunnels deep inside the dam. He wanted to check it personally before signing off on the reports. Security logs show him entering the access shaft at 8:47 p.m., wearing his hard hat and carrying a clipboard and flashlight. That was the last confirmed sighting of him alive. When Daniel failed to return by midnight, a supervisor raised the alarm. Security officers searched the tunnel where he was last logged. Found his clipboard lying neatly against the wall, pages filled with notes about structural stress and water seepage. His flashlight was discovered 50 feet further in, turned off and placed carefully on the ground. But Daniel was gone. The initial assumption was that he'd fallen into one of the spillways or shafts. The dam is a maze of corridors and machinery, and the intake towers can pull in thousands of gallons of water every second. But no alarms had gone off, no safety grates were disturbed, and no body was recovered. Divers searched the intake pools, sonar scanned the reservoir, but nothing surfaced. If he had slipped into the water, his body should have appeared downstream at Lake Mojave. It never did. Investigators combed through security footage. Cameras covered the main walkways and entrances, but inside the maintenance tunnels, coverage was limited. The only footage showed Daniel entering. None showed him leaving. His badge was never swiped at an exit point. It was as if the dam had swallowed him whole. Rumors spread quickly. Some workers whispered about the ones who never left, a reference to the men who died during the original construction in the 1930s. Officially, 96 workers were killed building Hoover Dam, but locals insist the true number is much higher, that many were entombed within the concrete itself, buried when wet cement poured faster than bodies could be retrieved. They claimed the dam was haunted, that the dead lingered in the tunnels, restless and unseen. Daniel's wife, Karen, rejected the supernatural theories. She believed foul play was involved. She pressed investigators to consider whether her husband had stumbled on something he shouldn't have sabotaged, smuggling, something hidden in the depths of the dam. Officials assured her no evidence of crime was found, but she remained unconvinced. Danny didn't just disappear, she told reporters. He was taken. Over the next months, strange details emerged. One guard swore he heard voices echoing in the tunnels during the search, 2 men speaking in a language he didn't recognize. Another claimed he saw wet footprints leading away from the spillway, prints too large to belong to Daniel. Each report was dismissed as stress, exhaustion, or imagination. But together they painted an unsettling picture. The Bureau of Reclamation eventually declared the case unresolved, but closed. Daniel Rourke was presumed dead, lost to the machinery, or the waters of Hoover Dam. His family received compensation. His name added quietly to a long list of workers who had died there. But unlike the others, his body was never recovered. His death never explained. Visitors to the dam today often remark on its oppressive silence. Tour guides speak of its engineering triumphs, but locals tell another story. They say, sometimes, if you linger near the intake towers at dusk, you'll hear tapping from deep within the concrete, as though someone is knocking to get out. Maintenance crews report radios cutting out in the lower tunnels, voices warping with static, strange whispers layered under the hum of the turbines. Karen Rourke never remarried. She raised her daughter in Las Vegas, always telling her that her father had been brave, that he had gone missing doing his job. In private, though, she admitted her doubts. She kept Daniel's hard hat on a shelf in her home, untouched. The last physical proof that he had been there at all. Nearly 40 years later, his disappearance remains one of the strangest ever recorded. At Hoover Dam, for a man to vanish inside one of the most surveilled, heavily guarded structures in America seems impossible. And yet, Daniel Rourke walked into its depths and never came out. Some say he fell victim to an accident, his body lost to the labyrinth of tunnels and currents. Others believe he uncovered something hidden within the dam, something that cost him his life. And a few, the ones who stand at night on the dam's great wall and listen to the roar below, believe something older and stranger lives in that churning water, something that waits, patient and unseen, for those who wander too far into its domain. Whatever the truth, the Hoover Dam holds its secrets. Daniel Rourke became one of them. The Appalachian Trail stretches for more than 2,000 miles, a ribbon of wilderness winding from Georgia to Maine. For some, it is a pilgrimage, a test of endurance and spirit. For others, it is a refuge, a place to lose themselves in the trees and silence. In the summer of 1998, a young woman named Marjorie Marge Klein set out to hike a section of the trail in Virginia. She was 26 years old, an experienced backpacker, and she planned to walk alone for 2 weeks before meeting her boyfriend in Harper's Ferry. She never made it. Her disappearance remains one of the most haunting mysteries the Appalachian Trail has ever seen. Marge had grown up in Vermont, raised by parents who believed in resilience and independence. By the time she was a teenager, she could navigate by compass, build a fire in the rain, and read weather by the clouds. Friends described her as fearless, but not careless. She knew the dangers of the trail wildlife, sudden storms, even strangers, but she loved it anyway. Hiking, she once wrote in her journal, made her feel as if the earth itself was breathing with me. On June 11th, 1998, she set off from Shenandoah National Park, her pack loaded with food, a tent, maps, and a small camera. She phoned her boyfriend, David, the night before, promising to meet him in Harper's Ferry on June 25th. That was the last call he ever received. Other hikers saw her in the first days of her journey. She chatted briefly with her father and son, near big meadows, asking about water sources. A pair of through hikers remembered her smile and the way she sang softly while walking, as if keeping herself company. Her last confirmed sighting was on June 17th, when 2 women met her at a shelter near Loft Mountain. She told them she was feeling strong, covering good miles each day, and planned to reach Harper's Ferry on schedule. When she failed to appear on June 25th, David reported her missing. Rangers launched a search, scouring the trail and the surrounding woods. Dozens of volunteers joined in, their voices echoing through the forest as they called her name. They found her campsite from June 16th, neatly arranged, her journal carefully stored in a plastic bag. The entries ended abruptly, mid-sentence. The woods are alive tonight, voices I don't recognize, but that was the final line. Her pack was never recovered. Her body was never found. Speculation ran wild. Some believed she had gotten lost, strayed from the trail, and succumbed to exposure. But Marjorie was too skilled, too experienced, to simply vanish a mile or 2 from safety. Others suspected foul play. The Appalachian Trail, for all its beauty, has a darker history of violence, hikers assaulted, even murdered by strangers they met in the woods. Rangers investigated known offenders in the area, but came up empty. No signs of a struggle, no discarded gear, no witnesses who saw her leave with anyone. Then came the stranger reports. Searchers claimed they heard footsteps shadowing them, but saw no one. One volunteer swore he heard a woman's voice calling faintly from the trees, though no one else heard it. A week into the search, dogs picked up a scent trail leading off the main path, winding into dense underbrush before abruptly stopping at a circle of stones, as if someone had built a small fire there long ago. Nothing else was found. David, her boyfriend, never stopped looking. He spent months retracing her route, speaking to anyone who had been on the trail that summer. He found hikers who claimed to have seen a young woman who looked like her days after the official timeline, but none of the descriptions were consistent. Some said she was alone, others said she was walking with a tall man. Each sighting led nowhere. By winter, the case went cold. Rangers filed it as an unresolved disappearance, another unsolved story added to the long, quiet ledger of people who walk into the wilderness and never come back. And yet, Marjorie's name lingers among hikers. On forums and in shelters, they tell her story, often lowering their voices as if the woods themselves might be listening. They talk about her unfinished journal entry, the way it ends with voices I don't recognize. Some insist she fell victim to a dangerous stranger. Others whisper about the Appalachian Trail's older legends, the ghostly lights, the strange singing that drifts through the forest at night, the feeling that you are being followed even. When you were alone in the years since, there have been reported sightings, always vague, always unconfirmed. A lone hiker in Maine swore he passed a woman who matched Marjorie's description, wearing outdated gear. When he turned to speak to her, she was gone. A trail maintenance worker in Tennessee claimed he found a faded photograph of Marjorie tucked into a crevice of an oak tree, though it was never produced as evidence. Her parents eventually placed a memorial along the trail, a simple plaque with her name and the words, "She walked with the earth." Hikers leave stones and wildflowers there, small tokens for a woman who became part of the trail's lore. What happened to Marjorie Klein in 1998 is still unanswered. She may have crossed paths with someone dangerous. She may have stepped off the trail into terrain even her skills could not conquer. Or perhaps the wilderness itself, vast and untamed, claimed her in a way no investigation can explain. Every summer, new hikers set out on the Appalachian Trail, carrying stories like hers with them. They talk about the ones who disappeared, the ones who left only questions behind. And sometimes, when night falls and the woods close in, they swear they hear footsteps behind them, light and steady, as if someone is still walking the trail, forever caught between 1 mile and the next. On the night of June 11th, 1962, 3 inmates vanished from Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary and were never seen again. Their disappearance remains one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. Alcatraz was supposed to be a cold fortress rising from the waters of San Francisco Bay, cut off from the mainland by strong tides and frigid currents. But Frank Morris, along with brothers Clarence and John Anglin, proved otherwise, or at least came closer than anyone before them. Whether they succeeded or perished in the black waters of the bay has never been answered. Morris was a career criminal, intelligent and meticulous. He had an IQ said to be among the highest ever recorded at Alcatraz. The Anglin brothers had grown up in Florida, working as hands, known for their loyalty to each other and their skill with tools. The 3 men were placed in adjacent cells, and slowly, methodically, they began to dig, using crude tools fashioned from spoons and saw blades stolen from the prison workshop. They chipped away at the concrete around the air vents in their cells. The noise was masked by the roar of music played during hours of practice by the prison band. Over the course of months, they widened the vents enough to crawl through. Behind the cells was a network of utility corridors, dark, damp, and barely patrolled. They built a raft and life vests out of raincoats, more than 50 of them, stitched together and sealed with heat from prison steam pipes. They fashioned wooden paddles. They even sculpted dummy heads out of soap, toilet paper, and real hair collected from the prison barber shop. These were placed in their beds, tucked under blankets. 2 full guards during nighttime head counts. On the evening of June 11th, everything was ready. After lights out, Maurice and the Anglins slipped through their cell vents, crawled up the utility shafts, and made their way onto the prison roof. From there, they climbed down a drain pipe, crossed the prison yard, and disappeared into the water with their makeshift raft. By morning, they were gone. It wasn't until the next day that guards discovered the dummies and raised the alarm. The FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in history. Helicopters swept the bay. Boats combed the water. The coastline was searched for miles. The only evidence recovered was a paddle floating near Angel Island and a wallet wrapped in plastic, containing family photos allegedly belonging to one of the but no bodies were ever found. The official conclusion was grim. The FBI declared that the men had drowned, their raft destroyed by the unforgiving currents, their bodies pulled out to sea. The water temperature that night had been in the low 50s, cold enough to sap strength in minutes. The tides were against them, sweeping outward toward the Pacific. Survival, according to authorities, was impossible, but doubt lingered. Family members of the Anglins insisted they received postcards and phone calls long after 1962, though none could be verified. In 2013, a photograph surfaced, ALLEGEDLY, showing Clarence and John Anglin alive in Brazil in the 1970s. Experts debated the image, some claiming it was authentic, others calling it a hoax. In 2018, the FBI received a letter supposedly written by one of the escapees, stating that he and his brothers had lived for decades under assumed identities. "We made it that night," the letter read, though its authenticity was never proven. The handwriting analysis was inconclusive, and the trail ended there. The case remains open with the U.S. Marshals Service, which continues to list the men as wanted fugitives, even though they would now be in their 90s. Every few years, new tips surface. A rumored sighting in South America, a confession on a deathbed, a grainy photograph tucked into an envelope. Each one is investigated. Each one ends without closure. The mystery has taken on a life of its own. Some believe the men drowned, that the bay claimed them, and that their bodies rest somewhere in its cold depths. Others are convinced they slipped into new lives, quietly blending into the world beyond Alcatraz. Perhaps they sat at kitchen tables under different names, grew old in anonymity, and smiled each time they saw the prison in movies or photographs, knowing the world still wondered. For the families of the escapees, the silence was its own kind of torment. The Anglin's mother, according to relatives, would receive flowers anonymously on Mother's Day for years after. 1962. Some believed it was her sons reaching out in the only way they could. She died never knowing if they were alive or dead. As for Alcatraz itself, the prison closed less than a year after the escape, deemed too costly to maintain. Its cells are now empty, its corridors filled with tourists rather than guards. But the story of Maurice and the Anglins clings to its walls. Guides tell visitors about the dummies in the beds, the holes in the walls, the homemade raft that slipped silently into the night. They paused at the cells where it began, letting people imagine what it must have felt like to crawl into darkness, carrying nothing but hope and desperation. The bay outside glitters under the sun, calm and inviting, but those who know its waters understand how deceptive it can be. Even today, swimmers attempt the crossing from Alcatraz to San Francisco under controlled, supervised conditions. Many succeed. That fact alone keeps the question alive. If modern athletes can do it, could Morris and the Anglins have done it too, even in the cold dark of June 1962? The answer remains locked in history, unsolved. The men either lie at the bottom of San Francisco Bay, or lived out their days free, hidden in plain sight. Both possibilities are haunting. What is certain is that they vanished, swallowed either by the water or by the world, leaving nothing but shadows in their place. More than 60 years later, the Alcatraz escape endures, not because it was the perfect crime, but because it was never finished. Somewhere between the prison's stone walls and the distant shore, 3 men disappeared, and the truth slipped beneath the waves, never to be pulled back again.
Thank you for following.